So do you guys remember how like a couple days ago we were all like, well, yeah, these really good buffs for all the Sakura faces over on the JP version of the game is really good and all, but where's Summer BB? Like, I'm really happy that they're buffing the free-to-play version. Well, JPFGO said, hold my beer, I'm not done. And they dropped Summer BB on her own banner and then also gave her an insanely good buff to her first skill. And while I was planning on covering the Seraph event over on the NA version of the game with Melta Lilith, King Protea, Passionlip, and Suzuka, I'm gonna have to take a little bit of a break to talk about Summer BB over here, and anything they might potentially drop tomorrow, as Wednesday morning or, Tuesday night, depending on your time zone, is usually when they drop stuff over on the JP version of the game. So with the JP version currently being on fire with all of the buffs that they're putting out and the pretty decent banner now with just solo Summer BB on raid up, I can't wait to see what they potentially do tomorrow or see if they disappoint me when I wake up Wednesday morning. But with that being said, let's go ahead and start off this video right by talking about Summer BB's hits, which she's a pretty standard .jpeg buster servant. She's rocking double buster cards, double arts cards. Those arts cards are pretty strong with 3 hits apiece and 0.61% NP gain. Now, this does mean with the NP gain and the kind of more average hit counts, you're going to be very reliant on getting crits with Summer BB's arts cards to actually gen that NP, as just normal arts cards aren't really going to gen that much. Thankfully, BB does have ways to gen her own stars for herself, but even if you find that to be lacking, she does have a very strong quick card with 4 hits on it and is rocking 14.8% star generation rate itself. Keep in mind that she also does have the existence outside the domain passive skill that gens a passive 2 stars every single turn, which may not sound like a whole lot, but if you're getting in that range where your team comp is consistently dropping like 38 or even like 48 stars, those extra 2 stars can push you over that limit to where you can make like 4 cards crits or even 5 cards, all 5 of them crits. So don't discount that extra 2 stars. I know it's helped me out in clutch situations every now and then, so don't discount it. She also does have a passive buff to her arts cards, so they are deceptively a little bit better than they are appearing to be. And notably, she is also immune to burn damage. So like if there's ever a boss that you find particularly annoying, I don't know, maybe you're still in 1.5 and you're gonna do the Tomoe Gozen fight where she just burns all of your characters to death, bring Summer BB, right? She's good for that. So stuff like that, where the characters are going to be spamming a lot of burns, she is exceptionally good for because she's just flat out immune to it. That being said, she does only have a 4-hit extra attack, which automatically means that she is the worst servant in the game. Why did they shaft my girl BB like this? As you guys know, the extra attack is a composite card that gens stars NP and does big boy damage. 5 hits is the gold standard, 4 a little bit below average, but because Summer BB's skills and her NP are so good, we're going to go ahead and let it slide. That being said, let's transition over into her first skill, and this is actually the skill of the hour. It was already a very, very strong skill, basically just being Jalter's crit skill, where she gets the pretty decent star weight and the very good 50% crit damage for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, keeping in mind that for people that need a reference point, 50% crit damage is the same crit buff that like Waver gives to people, right? So it's definitely not bad, and it comes packed with star weight to really make sure that BB is getting all of those crits for herself. However, now they have buffed it and almost like a meme on me, right? Not only did they give her a 30% attack buff for 3 turns, which greatly actually helps out her damage, it actually pushes her in the upper echelon for AoE buster servants in general. But then she also gains 20 crit stars when attacking with her extra attack. So it's almost like some big meme on me where they're just like, oh, the extra attack's not good enough for you, buddy. Well, what if every time she uses the extra attack, boom, 20 stars? And this actually will pair very nice with her 3rd skill when we get to it, because if you can basically lock it down to where BB is always doing a Brave Chain while this skill is up, it's actually incredibly good. And it keeps her just super on all of the time, if you guys get what I'm saying. Because between the passive little bit of stars, between the stars she can refund on her 3rd skill, and the fact that she can drop 20 every time she does a Brave Chain, including the stars that she generates from doing a Brave Chain, especially if you can get that quick card in there, she becomes quite insane and becomes quite the threat. And this really does just round out her kit, because not to also overlook that attack buff, as I just mentioned, it did greatly raise her damage a lot. Because let's just go ahead and talk about skill 2. If you look at her second skill, she's rocking a 20% buster buff for 3 turns as well, meaning that 30% attack buff is going to multiply into that 20% buster buff for all 3 turns, as well as it's going to multiply into that 50% NP damage buff that she also gets for 3 turns. Originally, her damage was just kind of okay before she got this buff, but now with the introduction of another large buff, a 30% attack buff, to further multiply into these other buff types, because as you guys know, I keep telling you, different buff types in FGO are not additive, they are multiplicative, meaning your card buffs, your NP damage buffs, your attack buffs, and your special damage mods all multiply into each other to give you even more damage than if you were to just use like 4 different attack buffs. And I think that really is the key to just push Bibi into the upper echelon of just having her be a really good damage dealing servant. But the key thing is, it's that she's very consistent as well. You guys know that I'm really pushing this idea that you need servants to be really good for longer turns, right? These burst servants are getting worse and worse as the bosses kind of get harder. They're still good for these like corner case situations, don't get me wrong. People like Skahawk, people like Munenori, people like Li Xuan, all those other characters, they will have their uses, right? They'll always be like very, very good if you just need to put a lot of damage on somebody and end the fight very, very quickly. But for the most part, a lot of these fights are becoming more and more just long, drawn-out brawls, and to have a servant that can not only put out that much damage as Summer Bibi is able to now with her introduction of her first skill buff, but also keep that up for 3 turns, especially again with her third skill that we'll get into in just a second. It makes her very, very hyper consistent. It makes her like one of the better options now to bring into like harder content. She was already a very good niche option, but now she's kind of cutting it in for herself, right? Because she used to be there to support other people, but now she can truly take the spotlight. I mean, let's also just not gloss over the other things she does on this skill. She gives herself a 50% battery, which now with her insane, even just NP1 damage, makes her very, very good with the Koyenskaya meta. Keep in mind that the Buster AoE servants that have a 50% battery are the premium characters that you want to be using with Koyenskaya. They are her favorite partners, because in those setups, you can also bring in people like Oberon as well, and you can really maximize out on the damage that you're doing. And I mean, Bibi's already got high NP damage, and with Oberon busting that up and giving her even more NP damage, things can get very ridiculous very quickly. She also has some method of survivability on this skill that gives her 1 hit of evasion for 3 turns. It's kind of tied to all of her good stuff skill, because I mean, this is giving her NP, the majority of her damage, and a nice heal. But it is nice that that evasion does last for 3 turns, so you can potentially not waste it and try and save it for, you know, a situation when you need it. But then again, the name of the game with at least double Koyenskaya or even Koyenskaya plus Oberon is you're trying to obliterate the enemy in at least 3 turns. You are trying to end the fight as quickly as possible. Although you could still get pretty tanky if you're going to go ahead and use Merlin or even double Merlin it up, as Merlin himself is still very, very viable and still very, very good. But with that being said, let's move over to her third skill, the one that I've kind of been referencing throughout this video. It's the very, very infamous Summer Bibi skill that locks all of your cards in place. So basically, it just does exactly what it says. If you have like 3 Summer Bibi cards and then like say a Arts Merlin card and a Buster Koyenskaya card, those are going to be completely locked for the next 3 turns. And it allows a lot of very disgusting specific 3-turn setups. For instance, did you know that the last fight in Lost Belt 4 against Ashwataman and the Giant Tree is actually a farming node if you use Summer Bibi? Because if you can get to a point where you can guarantee that you're going to get like Parvati's cards after her NP every time, you can literally turn that fight into a childish farming node, because you can guarantee that you're going to be getting your best, most optimal cards every single time. The only downside to this skill is that you have to find like a good setup that you like, because there are times that you'd be like, oh, these face cards are not very good. Like for instance, if you're going to be using Bibi as your primary DPS servant, you can't pop this skill when you have like all 5 Merlin cards, right? Like, because it kind of defeats the point of using your Bibi as your main DPS. You'll be locked out of Bibi for 3 turns. So it does take a little bit of like skill, you could say, in recognizing what hand you need, right? And like what cards you need for the given situation and how you're going to be able to optimally use your BB. But once you kind of figure it out and you kind of get the hang of it, it is an impressively powerful skill, and makes sense why they haven't printed another skill like this that locks command cards. But I also mentioned earlier that it also gives her a little bit of star refund, and yes, it gives her an additional 10 stars every single turn for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. This is supposed to kind of be like, oh, you lock your cards down with BB, you pair it with the first skill, so not only do you now only have BB's cards, but you're also genning those stars every turn to take advantage of with the first skill. So overall, all of her skills are very, very impressive. That first skill buff literally just gave her the little bit of extra damage she needed to be top tier, and then the ability to fully take advantage of her own Brave Chains. And it just makes her an absolutely disgusting servant. That being said as well, I mean, the primary goal of every servant in FGO is to get to their NP, and Summer BB is no different. Now that her NP is doing just a big chonking amount of damage, did you know that it also has a lot of defensive capabilities in it as well? Because not only does it reduce all enemies' NP gauge by 1, but it also has a 10 to 50% chance to further reduce that gauge by 1 as well. So if you are effectively looping Summer BB's NP, you lock your opponents, outside of just fully charging their NP on like a break bar or something, out of using any of their NPs, which is an insanely powerful thing to do, because that's pretty much most of the times how you're going to get killed in FGO. You know, sometimes you get face carded, sometimes you get unlucky, you die to poison damage, you get an unlucky crit, but most of the time you're just getting washed by NPs, right? That's pretty much the main way the enemies are going to be killing you, because for the most part, getting hit by those NPs is a death sentence, right? Sometimes you can tank a crit, sometimes your servants are good enough to take a hit or two, right? You can apply some defensive buffs, but usually outside of just like solemn defense, invul, or like a dodge, you're not going to live an NP. The fact that she can completely lock the opponents out of that is insanely good if you are looping her NP effectively, and it just makes her a complete package. When I was asking for her to get that skill buff or an NP buff, I didn't really care what they were going to do with Summer BB as long as they gave her a buff with all the other Sakura faces. I did not expect it to be this good. I thought maybe they would give her a buff to her third skill that not only gens the stars every single turn, but maybe just gives her like 10% NP every single turn, which would have been good as well. But being so generous to give her a 30% attack buff for 3 turns to further gas up her damage and make her an absolute killer when she has access to Brave Chains, it really does just make her like an all-around complete threat. And yeah, this is definitely one of those servants that you should now be looking out for. If you're on the NA version of the game and you're like, oh, I spot Summer BB's on raid up, might not be a bad idea to go ahead and try to snag her in the future. And if you're on the JP version of the game, well, again, I've already done a couple of multis for Summer BB, and they have not exactly been going well, but I probably won't stop because this girl is looking pretty insane. Plus, I mean, it's BB. Like, who doesn't like BB? What are you, Team Saber face and Rin face? Like, get out of here. It's literally Team Sakura face for the Dubsky, all right? Here in the ZTL house, we are Sakura stans. Although, we kind of get along with Saberface stans and Rin. I mean, if you're a Reshkagal, you're fine. Everyone else, I don't want to talk to you. Okay, now that I've completely divided the fan base, because I'm just ready for the comments to be all like Sakura stans and Saber and Rin stans just all fighting each other. Now that I've gotten my community into all-out war, let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoy daily FGO content, make sure you leave a like on the video and you subscribe to the channel. We are very, very close to 20K, and I'm really excited to be there, because not only is that a milestone that I never thought I would reach, but it also means we're a fifth of the way to 100K, and that is kind of like the gates of heaven for me. I'm like, if we can make it there, I'll be like, we can make it anywhere, right? That's the biggest hurdle for me. So, you know, we're getting close there. We're actually making progress, and it's really, really cool to see. If you want bonus content, I stream every weekday over on my Twitch, and I've been absolutely loving it. I would love to see more of you guys coming out to the streams because they're just so much fun. But with all that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace, late guys.